You ever get the feeling your family built a future and made sure you weren't in it? That's what happened to me. I'm Rachel, and I found out I wasn't invited to my own brother's wedding. Not even a phone call, just a message. It's just family. But this isn't a story about revenge. It's about what happens when the reliable one finally walks away. When silence speaks louder than any scream. So if you've ever been the afterthought, the backup plan, the one who never mattered until something went wrong, stay. Because what I did next didn't just change the wedding. It changed everything. It was a Wednesday morning, grey and wet, the kind that makes you pull your sweater tighter and hope the coffee kicks in fast. I was buttoning my coat, halfway to grabbing my keys, when my phone buzzed. A group text. Nothing unusual until I read it. Hey all, just confirming the guest list is tight. No extras. Hope you understand. Can't wait to celebrate. My brother, Matt. No name, no direct message, just a digital proclamation. I reread it twice before realizing what it meant. I wasn't invited. Not an oversight, not a misunderstanding, a decision. My heart stuttered. I sat on the edge of my couch, phone in hand, coat half done, staring at the message like it might shift if I looked long enough. Then another buzz. My mother. Rachel, just a heads up. It's a small ceremony, only family. I hope you understand. I nearly dropped the phone. Only family? That phrase cracked something open inside me. I was family. Matt's only sister, the one who'd driven him to college, proofread his essays, listened to him cry after his first breakup. But now, I was just a name that didn't make the cut. I didn't respond. What do you even say to that? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, 1,000 words bubbling up and dying before I could type. Anger, confusion, hurt, mostly hurt. I sat there until the coffee went cold and the room got darker with the weight of what had just happened. I wasn't wanted. I wasn't part of their picture. And they weren't even sorry. I didn't cry, not at first. I just sat there, staring out the window as Brooklyn's drizzle painted streaks down the glass. It wasn't just about the wedding. Not really. It was about everything that came before, the forgotten birthdays, the missed calls, the way my name always seemed to fall off the guest list, both literally and metaphorically. Matt was the golden boy, the one they talked about with pride. I was the also, the background character in every family story. I tried to remember the last time I truly felt seen by them. Maybe when I was 10 and won a spelling bee? No, even then my mum said, "That's nice, but your brother got straight A's again." That had always been the rhythm. My achievements were whispers, his were celebrations. So when I didn't get an invitation, it wasn't shocking. It was just the first time they'd said it out loud. You don't belong. My phone lit up again, this time from Aunt Lila. A photo of the dress she planned to wear, the caption, "Can't wait to see everyone there." Everyone. That word echoed. Everyone but me. I should have called someone, confronted my mum, yelled at Matt, demanded answers, but I didn't. Instead, I opened my laptop and searched last-minute flights from NYC. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed out, away from the silence, away from the reminder that I was always optional. Portland. It sounded like rain and pine and people who didn't know my family. I booked the first flight I found, leaving in 12 hours. I packed slowly, deliberately. Not because I was running away, but because I was finally done standing still. As I zipped my suitcase shut, I whispered aloud, just once, "Let them wonder where I went." The morning air felt heavier than usual as I stepped outside my apartment. Brooklyn was still wet from last night's rain, puddles reflecting the faded sky above. I hailed a cab, my suitcase wobbling behind me like a stubborn reminder of the life I was leaving behind. The driver didn't ask questions. He just nodded when I said, "JFK, please," and turned up the radio. As we crossed the bridge, I stared out at the skyline. Each building looked like a chapter I no longer wanted to reread. My family was somewhere out there, probably finalizing the wedding playlist or arguing over seating charts, without me. The cab's heater clicked on, warm air swirling around my knees, but it couldn't touch the cold that had settled deep in my chest. At the airport, I moved like a ghost through security, past the bustling families and honeymooners. Everyone had someone waiting. I had no send-off, no goodbye hug, just a boarding pass with my name on it and a gate number that promised escape. When the plane finally took off, I pressed my forehead against the window and watched New York shrink beneath the clouds. Touching down in Portland was like exhaling for the first time in years. The air smelled like rain-soaked earth and cedar. Everything was quieter, slower, like the city itself respected the need for space. I checked into a small inn just outside downtown, a converted craftsman house that felt more like a forgotten poem than a hotel. My room had creaky floorboards and a window that overlooked a crooked street lined with trees. I dropped my bag and sat on the edge of the bed, absorbing the stillness. No buzzing phone, no obligation, just me. For dinner, I wandered until I found a little cafe tucked behind a bookstore. The lights were soft, the air smelled like cinnamon, and no one looked twice at me. For the first time in years, I wasn't anyone's daughter, sister, or disappointment. I was just Hannah. The next morning, Portland greeted me with a mist that clung gently to everything: windows, trees, the sleeves of my jacket. I wandered without a destination, letting my boots find their rhythm on wet sidewalks and under moss-covered awnings. Each corner I turned felt like a clean slate. No one knew me here. There were no expectations, no silent judgments, just strangers moving through their own stories. I stopped at a coffee cart nestled between two art galleries. The barista smiled and handed me a chai latte with a flourish, like I was a regular. I sat on a bench nearby, hands cupped around the warm paper cup, and watched the city breathe. It didn't ask questions, it just let me be. Later, I found myself in a small park with uneven paths and crooked benches. I sat beneath a cedar tree and opened my journal, a habit I'd long forgotten. The pages felt strange beneath my fingers, like meeting an old friend you didn't realize you missed. I started writing, not about the wedding or my family, but about the sound of rain hitting leaves, about the way freedom didn't always feel loud. Sometimes it whispered. That afternoon, I wandered into a bookstore with a crooked door and a bell that rang like wind chimes. I browsed aimlessly, running fingers over spines of novels and poetry collections until I stumbled upon a small shelf labelled Local Authors. One book caught my eye, What We Leave Behind, the title etched in gold on a navy cover. I flipped it open and read a poem that began, I am not the sum of who didn't see me. I nearly dropped the book. I bought it, tucked it under my arm, and stepped back into the drizzle. Every step I took felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. No one was calling, no one was checking in. And oddly, that felt like permission to exist outside of their orbit, to matter even if no one was watching. Back at the inn, I curled into a chair by the window and read the book cover to cover. One line stayed with me. Some silences are loud enough to echo. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just existed, quietly, fully, in a space that felt entirely mine. The next day was colder, the kind of chill that seeped into your fingertips and stayed there. I wrapped myself in a scarf and wandered through the side streets near the river, where art spilled out of alleyways and stories seemed to hang in the air like fog. That's when I saw her. A woman crouched low near a patch of wildflowers sprouting defiantly from the cracks in the pavement. She had dark, curly hair tucked into a mustard beanie and wore a denim jacket over mismatched gloves. Her laughter rang out sharp and free, echoing off the buildings around her. I paused. It was the kind of sound that didn't ask for permission, the kind I hadn't made in a long time. They bloom late this year, she said without looking up, then glanced at me with a grin. Stubborn little things. I nodded, unsure if I was supposed to respond. You're not from here, she added, standing and brushing off her knees. I smiled faintly. Brooklyn. She looked me over. My city coat, my hesitant stance, the uncertainty I wore like another layer. Thought so, she said. You've got that out-walking something look. I couldn't help but chuckle. That obvious? Only to someone who's done it, she said with a wink. I'm Clara. We walked together for a while, past antique shops and bakeries that smelled like cinnamon and butter. She pointed out tide pools on a faded mural, told me about the poetry nights at a bar near the pier, and shared that she worked part-time as a florist, part-time as a writer, full-time observer of human messes. She didn't ask why I was there, didn't pry, just existed beside me like a question I didn't have to answer. Before we parted, she scribbled an address on a napkin. Dinner party tonight, nothing fancy, just a few weirdos eating too much and talking too loud. Bring wine, or don't, just bring yourself. I almost declined, almost let my mother's voice creep in. Don't impose, Jenny, don't be a burden. But something in me shifted. Maybe it was Clara's easy kindness. Maybe it was the poem from yesterday echoing in my bones. I nodded. Okay. Back at the inn, I held the napkin in my hand, like it was a map to something I'd forgotten I was looking for, something that felt like belonging, not because I earned it, but because it was offered freely. That evening, I stood outside Clara's house, a weather-worn bungalow with wind chimes that laughed in the breeze and a crooked mailbox that leaned like it had secrets. For a long moment, I just stared at the front door, debating. My fingers tightened around the bottle of red wine I'd picked up from the corner shop. Not expensive, not impressive, just something. My feet itched to turn back, to run. What if I was too quiet, too strange? What if I didn't belong? But then the door swung open. Clara stood there with flour on her cheek and a dish towel thrown over one shoulder. You came, she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Inside, the house buzzed with mismatched energy, pots bubbling on the stove, candles flickering in glass jars, laughter overlapping like waves. People passed plates without fuss, shouted jokes over jazz music, and clinked glasses without ceremony. A man named Devon played guitar in the corner. A woman named Mo made soap in her garage and smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. No one asked about my job, my family, or why I looked like I'd been running from something. They asked about my favourite childhood meal, about what kind of sky I missed most, about whether I preferred city nights or forest mornings. It was effortless. I hadn't felt like this in years. No performance, no pressure, just presence. At one point, Clara raised her glass. "This is Jenny," she said, loud enough to hush the room. She walks like she's unravelling, but somehow still upright, and I like that. The room cheered, not because they knew me, but because they welcomed me anyway. Later, as the night stretched long and the wine softened every edge, I found myself laughing, loud, unguarded, real. The kind of laugh I didn't recognise at first, the kind that hadn't been heard in my parents' house, not even when we pretended to be a family. Someone handed me a cupcake. Someone else asked if I played cards. No one asked if I RSVP'd. No one measured my worth against a checklist. I wasn't the helper, the buffer, the ghost at the edge of photos. I was just Jenny. When I left, Clara hugged me tight and whispered, "You're good company, Jenny. Don't forget that." I walked home under a starless sky, the napkin still in my coat pocket, crumpled but safe. 3 days passed before I checked the family group chat again. Not because I missed them, God no, but because I was curious. There's a strange kind of power in watching from the outside, isn't there? Like holding a mirror up to the chaos and realising finally you don't have to clean it. The group thread, still ironically titled Home Base from years ago, had sprung back to life. Emojis, photos, countdowns. Mark, always the centre of gravity, had posted a selfie with Amanda, both beaming in front of a fireplace at our parents' house. "Final venue deposit in, big day coming soon," the caption read. I stared at it for a while, the same house where I used to do everyone's dishes while Mark opened gifts, the same fireplace where we once hung stockings and pretended we were normal. My chest tightened, but not with grief, with clarity. The responses came fast. Mum flooded the chat with heart emojis. Dad threw in a thumbs up and a cringe-worthy joke about walking Amanda down the aisle if Mark got cold feet. Amanda, ever the polished bride-to-be, added a boomerang of her rehearsal dress, spinning like a music box figurine. But something was off. Mum's messages were too frequent. She was double texting, correcting herself. One blurry photo caught my attention, a table cluttered with notebooks, receipts, and what looked like a calculator. "Budget night, almost there," she captioned. No one replied. I leaned back in bed, tea cooling on the nightstand, and stared at that photo. Something wasn't right. The money, the venue, the tension masked behind countdown stickers and curated smiles. The next day, another post, this one from Dad, a photo of Mark and Amanda laughing on the patio. Except in the background, just past the sliding glass door, sat a whiteboard, numbers crossed out, deadlines scrawled in red. I zoomed in and caught a glimpse of the word loan. I didn't message them, didn't ask, I just watched. Because for the first time, their storm wasn't mine to weather. The messages kept coming, little digital clues that something was unravelling. Mark posted a tuxedo selfie. Fit check. "What do you think, fam?" But only Amanda and our cousin Taylor replied. Mum was silent, and that was when I knew. They were waiting for me. They thought I'd cave, that I'd see the cracks forming and rush in with tape and glue, that I'd forgive the uninvitation, the silence, the disrespect, just so I could be the one to hold it all together again. I didn't. Instead, I walked. Portland's drizzle had become a balm, not a bother. I wandered into bookstores, through misty parks, past vendors selling things no one needed but everyone wanted. There was peace in being anonymous, in being no one's fixer. That's when I met Lily. She was crouched on a damp trail photographing moss-covered rocks. Her laugh startled a crow into flight. She wore layers of mismatched sweaters and boots that had definitely seen better days. "You're not from here," she said, standing. I hesitated. "New York." She smiled. "I knew it. You've got that running from something, walking toward nothing look." I laughed, and just like that, I wasn't alone. We walked the trail together, not saying much. She told me about her shop, flowers and poetry and tea, and the dinner party she was hosting that night. "Come," she said, "bring wine, or don't, just bring you." It had been years since I was invited to anything that didn't come with strings, years since someone wanted me for just me. I almost said no. But then I remembered. I wasn't the backup dancer in their show anymore. I said yes. That night, Lily's house glowed like a sanctuary tucked in the damp folds of the Pacific Northwest. Wind chimes whispered secrets on the porch as I climbed the steps, wine bottle in hand, cheap, red, and already sweating through the paper bag. I didn't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. Laughter pouring from the windows, music low and nostalgic, the scent of garlic and rosemary wafting through the door like a memory you forgot you loved. Inside, mismatched chairs surrounded a scarred table, overflowing with food. People talked over one another, mouths full, hands expressive. No one asked where I was from. No one tiptoed around me like I might break or judged the wine I brought or the silence I still carried like armour. They made space. Lily introduced me as Jane, who's walking her way back to herself. No one blinked. They just passed me a plate. I sat between a woman who made soap shaped like moons and a man who ran a non-profit for kids in foster care. We didn't talk about family, we talked about recipes, favourite smells, the weirdest dream we ever had. I laughed, not politely, not in defence, fully, loudly, until my stomach ached. And for the first time in maybe years, I felt seen. Not for what I could offer, not for what I'd done wrong, but just for being there. Later, as we stood by the fireplace with mugs of hot cider, Lily nudged me with her elbow. "You're good company, Jane," she said. Don't let anyone make you forget that." Her words echoed long after I'd left, boots echoing softly on the wet sidewalk. I stared at my phone once I got back to my room. Missed calls, a few texts. Nothing urgent, but all clawing with familiar desperation. I didn't respond, not because I wanted to punish them, because I'd finally remembered what it felt like to not owe anyone an explanation for existing. The next morning, the Portland sky was the colour of wet ash, clouds hanging low as if eavesdropping. I sat at the corner cafe with a chai latte that had gone lukewarm, staring at my phone like it might behave differently if I just waited long enough. Then came the message from Nora, my mother. Short, clinical. "Jane, we need to talk, please." I didn't reply. 3 minutes later, another ping. "It's important. It's about Mark's wedding." Mark, the golden boy, the son whose wedding I wasn't even invited to. My stomach tightened, but not with sadness this time, with curiosity. Then came the flood. Messages from Dad, from Mark himself. One from a number I didn't recognise, but knew instinctively was Serena, Mark's fiancée. "Can we count on you?" she asked, like I'd already agreed to something. The voicemails followed. I didn't press play until I got back to the inn. I sat cross-legged on my bed, wrapped in a borrowed knit blanket, phone resting like a weight on my thigh. Nora's voice filled the room. "Jane, dear, we need your signature for the loan. It's just a formality. You have the best credit. The venue's demanding full payment this week, and we've already maxed out our options." There it was, the truth. It wasn't about peace. It wasn't about closure. It was about a bank form with my name on it. Another voicemail, this time from Mark. "I know you're mad, but this is important. We're family. You can't just ignore that." I laughed. A bitter, breathless thing. Family. The word was a lock they kept trying to turn without a key. They hadn't invited me to the celebration, but they needed me for the bill. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was audacity. Still, I didn't delete the messages, not yet. I let them sit there, like rotting fruit on the counter, growing more sour with each hour. And for the first time, I understood something that felt like power. My silence wasn't passive. It was a refusal. A decision not to bend. The day bled into evening as Portland's skies poured a soft drizzle, washing the streets in silver light. I wandered past the bookstore again, the one with the creaky floorboards, and the owner who always smelled like peppermint and ink. I didn't go in. I just stood there, watching the way the rain curled down the awning, like it had secrets to tell. Back at the inn, I sat by the fireplace in the common room, pretending to read a novel while my phone buzzed like a trapped insect in my bag. I knew who it was. Knew it would be more pleas, more veiled guilt, wrapped in desperation. I left it untouched. Across from me, Clara settled into a chair with 2 steaming mugs. She handed one to me. "Chamomile and honey," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You looked like you needed comfort that didn't come with expectations." I smiled weakly. "That obvious?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared into her tea like it might show her something worth knowing. "Sometimes people only remember your number when they're drowning," she said finally. "Doesn't mean you're obligated to throw the rope." I held the mug tighter. "They want me to co-sign a loan." "Ah," she said, like that explained everything. Because of course the one they left out of the photo gets to hold the frame. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My silence was agreement. Clara reached into her pocket and handed me a small card. Her handwriting, messy and looping, filled one side. "A list of places," she said, "to walk, to breathe, to remember that you're more than what they forgot to value." That night, I lay in bed listening to the rain drum softly on the window pane. I didn't press play on the new voicemails. I didn't scroll through the texts. I just stared at the ceiling and tried to name the feeling rising inside me. It wasn't rage. It wasn't sadness. It was something new, something like resolve. The next morning, I finally listened to one voicemail, just one. My mother's voice quivered at the edge of tears. "Mira, sweetheart, We didn't mean to hurt you. You're our daughter. We're just under a lot of pressure. Mark's wedding is important for all of us. Please, just call back. But it wasn't an apology. It was a transaction. An emotional invoice disguised as affection. The words hit hollow like a doorbell that rang in an empty house. Then came another text, this one from Mark. No greeting, no remorse. Just, the venue needs the payment by Friday. You're the only one who qualifies. Don't do this to Serena. And just like that, it clicked. They weren't panicking because they'd lost me. They were panicking because they'd lost their backup plan. I wasn't a daughter or a sister to them. I was a fail-safe, a signature. I stood by the window and let the rising sun paint shadows across the floor. The sky outside was the soft pink of possibility, a city waking up without demands. In the cafe downstairs, I scribbled into my journal, things I will no longer do, sign papers for people who treat me like a placeholder, respond to guilt dressed as tradition, be the scaffolding for everyone else's joy while mine collapses quietly. Later, Clara found me by the window, tea in hand, a light in her eyes. You okay? I nodded slowly. I think I am. For the first time in a long time. She sat beside me. You're not just walking away from them, you know. I know, I whispered. I'm walking toward me. The realization was heavy, yet freeing, like shedding a skin that had never quite fit. The wedding might still happen, the debts might still drown them, or maybe everything would fall apart without me. But none of that was my responsibility anymore, and I wouldn't carry their collapse in my chest. The days passed like drifting fog. I didn't check the group chat. I didn't return the calls. Instead, I helped Clara organise wildflower bundles at the farmer's market and watched Mo experiment with beeswax candles that smelled like burnt oranges. It was messy and quiet and real. On the morning of the 5th day, my phone buzzed again, rattling against the wooden table like a wasp trapped in a jar. I didn't need to look. I knew it was them. My absence had finally shifted from inconvenience to crisis. That afternoon, Clara and I walked to the cliffs near Cannon Beach. The wind tangled my hair and the sea spat salt into my cheeks. We sat on a ledge with paper cups of hot cocoa between our palms. She glanced sideways. You look lighter. I feel heavier, I said, then corrected myself, but solid, like I finally belong in my own body. She smiled without asking for more. Back at the inn, I turned on my phone. Messages poured in like a broken faucet. From Mum, Mira, please, we're drowning here. From Dad, if you're punishing us, fine, but Mark and Serena, don't ruin their future. Then Mark, this is serious. They're going to cancel everything. I hope your silence is worth it. But the one that made my breath still came from Serena. Just 5 words. They always do this, huh? I read it twice, then again. Was it an olive branch? A confession? A fracture forming on the other side of the perfect bride facade? I didn't answer. I just stared at the words. Later that night, I received a photo from a cousin. No caption. Just an image of my mother on the front porch, face pale, shoulders tense, holding a folder. My father stood behind her, jaw clenched, staring off into the dark. The family home looked like it was caving in from the weight of its own expectations. The wedding was 3 days away. I'd been gone 10. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt powerful because they finally realized I wasn't coming back. At 2:47 a.m., the voicemail came. I was half awake, the moonlight tracing silver shapes across the ceiling. My phone lit up, buzzing just once. I didn't listen right away. Instead, I lay there, eyes wide, heart steady. No panic, no anticipation, just a deep, knowing calm. By morning, I sipped coffee on the porch of the inn before finally pressing play. It was Mum. Her voice, usually crisp and commanding, was frayed at the edges. Mira, I don't know if you'll even hear this. God, I don't know what to say anymore. A pause, the sound of rustling papers in the background. They're pulling out. The venue, the bank, the guests are calling, and I told everyone we were fine. Another pause, this one longer, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked. I don't know what fine is anymore. That sentence curled itself around my chest like a vine. I closed my eyes and let it sink in. She wasn't calling out of love. She was calling from the wreckage. That day, Clara handed me a bag of blueberry scones and told me to walk the forest path behind the inn. "It'll clear your head," she said. I did. And halfway through the path, I realized something. I wasn't just gone from their lives. I was irrelevant to the version of the family they had tried to build, the version where I was silent, supportive, and invisible. Without me, their structure collapsed. Not because I was the center, but because I had been the glue. Back at the inn, I checked the group chat out of curiosity. Mark had posted, "We're postponing, thanks to everyone who supported us. We'll reassess later." No further explanation. Then Serena posted a photo, just her, standing alone in a quiet field in her rehearsal dress, hair undone. The caption read, "Sometimes the silence says it all." Underneath, a string of sympathetic comments from friends. But from my family, nothing. Just stillness. It hit me then. They weren't just unraveling. They were realizing I was never going to be the same Mira again, and I wasn't coming back to rescue them. That evening, Clara and I sat on the floor of her living room, surrounded by mismatched candles and a half-eaten lentil stew. Music played low from an old record player, something slow and wordless. The world outside felt far away, muted by fog and distance. "I think they expected me to fold," I murmured. Clara didn't answer right away. She passed me a chipped mug of cider instead. "And now? Now they're flailing, and I'm not sad. Should I be?" She shrugged. "You're grieving, just not what they think you're grieving." I stared at the flickering shadows on the ceiling. They only see me as a resource, a signature, a solution. "Not a person," she said softly. "Not their daughter," I whispered. The voicemail from earlier echoed in my mind, Mom's voice cracking, the desperation buried beneath practiced manipulation, but still no apology, no ownership, just the implied expectation that I'd step in, again. And for once, I didn't. Later that night, I wrote a list in my journal, what I owe no one. Silence when I want to speak, loyalty when I've been discarded, financial rescue for people who discard my presence, understanding without being understood in return. The next morning, my phone buzzed. One new voicemail. I didn't listen. Instead, I took the key to the inn's library and let myself in. Among the old books and worn-out armchairs, I found comfort, a cocoon. At noon, I got another text, this one from Mark. It was one line, "We're losing everything. I hope it was worth it." It stung. Not because of the words, but because of the entitlement. I typed a reply, then erased it. Instead, I messaged Clara. "Fire pit tonight?" Her response came instantly. "You bring the wine, I'll bring the weirdos." That night, under a blanket of stars and mist, we sat cross-legged in the grass, laughter rising like smoke. Devon played the guitar again. Mo told a ridiculous story about getting chased by a goat on a yoga retreat. I laughed so hard I cried. And for a moment, I felt it again, that lightness. I looked up at the sky and thought maybe this is family too, just not the one I was born into. I woke up to golden light spilling through the curtains and the distant sound of birdsong. Portland had given me many quiet mornings, but this one felt different, earned almost, like peace had decided to visit and stay a while. My phone sat untouched on the nightstand, face down, silent, just the way I left it. I didn't rush to check it. Instead, I brewed coffee slowly, savouring the aroma, the warmth in my palms. I thought of how many mornings I'd started in Brooklyn with dread, bracing for an obligation, a request, a reminder that I was someone else's safety net. Here, the only thing I owed was to myself. Around noon, curiosity tugged at me again. I powered on the phone, expecting more of the same. But this time, there was just one voicemail. No barrage, no texts. I hesitated, then pressed play. "Jenny," my mother's voice was low, frayed at the edges. "I don't know if you'll even hear this. I wanted you to know that Serena's moved out. The wedding's off. Mark's not talking to anyone. Your father, he's pretending nothing's wrong. But everything is wrong." There was a pause, the kind that fills a room with unspoken things. "I don't know how we got here," she whispered. "Maybe we never really saw you, not the way we should have. I keep thinking if you were here, things would have gone differently, but you're not, and that's on us. I'm sorry, Jenny. I really am." Click. The message ended. No plea, no manipulation, just regret. But it was too late. Not because I couldn't forgive her, but because I had finally learned I didn't need her apology to move forward. Forgiveness, I realized, was not about letting them back in. It was about letting myself go free. I stepped out onto the inn's small patio, coffee in hand, wrapped in a cardigan Clara had lent me. The breeze smelled of rain and rosemary. Children laughed in the distance. A dog barked twice. The world turned gently, as if waiting for me to decide what came next, and I knew what it was. That afternoon, I took a walk to the coast. The air had a bite to it, the salty breeze clinging to my skin, but the world around me felt clean, like a canvas waiting for the first brushstroke. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. I just needed space. Space from them, from everything that had tied me to a version of myself I no longer recognized. I walked for hours, lost in the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks, the wind whipping through the trees. Every step felt like shedding another layer, old expectations, old wounds, old apologies I never got. When I finally returned to the inn, I found a message from Clara. "You're not answering them, are you?" I stared at the words, a smile tugging at my lips. She had seen it, understood it, long before I could articulate it myself. I replied, no. The phone had been buzzing constantly, missed calls, more voicemails, texts, but they didn't matter anymore. I knew what they wanted, answers, justifications, another chance to make me the solution to their mess. But I wasn't their solution anymore. I wasn't anyone's to fix. I thought about it, my mother's voice shaking with regret, Mark probably still blaming me in the quiet of his own guilt. And Serena, who in a way was just as much a victim of their control as I had been. But none of that was my problem anymore. They weren't my family in the way I'd imagined. They were people I shared DNA with, but they hadn't seen me for years. Not really. They hadn't seen me when I worked my arse off, when I silently took on the burden of their expectations. They hadn't seen me when I needed them either. I made my decision. I wasn't going back to that. The next day, I packed up the last of my things, wrote a thank you note to the innkeeper, and made a reservation for a train ticket to Seattle. I wasn't running away from them. I was running towards something new, something that didn't carry the weight of their abandonment. But before I left, I did something I'd never done. I opened the family group chat. The last message was from Mark. "We're trying to figure things out. Let me know when you can help." I typed out a simple reply, my fingers steady as I pressed each key. "I'm sorry things fell apart. I hope you find the peace you need." Then I closed the chat, silenced my phone, and set it down. No more checking, no more waiting for something that wasn't coming. I stepped outside into the cool morning, carrying nothing but a small backpack, a ticket for a new beginning, and a heart that had finally learned to rest. The train to Seattle was smooth and quiet. The landscape rolled by in shades of grey and green, the mountains rising like silent giants against the horizon. I leaned my head against the window, letting the steady motion of the train soothe something inside me that had been restless for too long. I wasn't sure what I expected Seattle to offer, but it felt right. The city felt alive in a way that didn't demand me to belong. I could just exist here as I was, without the weight of anyone's expectations dragging behind me. I checked into a small guest house near Pike Place Market, a converted loft with a view of the water. The air smelled like coffee and sea salt. I didn't have any plans for the day, just to breathe, to unpack pieces of myself I had tucked away for years. I walked to the market, past fishmongers shouting over fresh catches and street musicians strumming their guitars. It was a new kind of chaos, but it didn't feel like it was swallowing me whole. I found a small bookstore tucked between a bakery and a florist. Inside, it was warm and filled with the scent of old paper. I wandered through the aisles, not looking for anything specific, just enjoying the act of looking. Then something caught my eye. An old journal, its leather cover worn and soft. I flipped it open to a random page. A line jumped out at me. "The greatest journeys are the ones that take us back to ourselves." I smiled. The words felt like a nudge, a reminder that this journey wasn't about escaping, but about returning to the person I was always meant to be, before I let the world write my story for me. I bought the journal and sat in a cafe by the water, sipping coffee and writing down thoughts, not for anyone else, but for me. For the first time, I was allowing myself to be enough without needing anyone's validation. The phone stayed off. I hadn't checked the messages since I left, and I didn't plan to. The silence was mine now, and it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the first time in years I had felt peace, not in spite of the quiet, but because of it. That night I watched the sun dip below the horizon from my guest house window. The colours in the sky were unlike any I'd ever seen in Brooklyn. It was a soft goodbye, a promise of new beginnings. I wasn't looking for anyone to call me back. I wasn't waiting for anyone to fix anything. I was just waiting for myself to catch up. And when the morning came, I knew this was where I was supposed to be. I was finally home. The sun rose the next morning, casting long shadows over the city. Seattle was waking up, but I felt like I had already been awake for years. The weight that had clung to me for so long had finally lifted, and I was breathing deeply, fully, for the first time in as long as I could remember. I spent the next few days exploring, not with any real destination in mind, but just to see what the world would show me when I didn't have anyone else's expectations in my head. I wandered through neighbourhoods I'd never visited, ate at a small cafe where the barista remembered my name after just one visit, and took long walks along the waterfront, watching the ferries cut through the water like whispers of a life I hadn't yet written. It was the kind of freedom I hadn't even realised I was missing, the freedom to choose, to just exist without apologising for it. On the fourth day, I walked into a small flower shop. The scent of fresh blooms hit me before I even opened the door. The shop was quiet, with soft music playing in the background. Clara had mentioned that she knew the owner, and I had a sudden impulse to stop in. Maybe it was because I was finally open to new connections. Or maybe it was because I wanted to find a piece of this city that would ground me. The shopkeeper, a woman with warm brown eyes and hands that seemed to know exactly how to shape a flower arrangement, greeted me with a smile. We exchanged a few pleasantries before she asked, "Are you new here?" I nodded. "Just a few days. I needed a change of scenery." She smiled knowingly. "We all need that sometimes. The world's too big to stay where you're expected to be." I chuckled. "Yeah, I've been learning that." She tilted her head as if weighing something unspoken. "Well, if you ever need a job, we're always looking for help. Flowers never stop needing arranging." And I paused, surprised by the offer. I'd never worked in a shop like this before, but the thought of it appealed to me in a way I couldn't explain. I had nothing tying me to anything right now, and maybe this was the step I'd been looking for, something simple, something real. "I might take you up on that," I said with a smile. As I walked out of the shop, the weight of a decision began to settle in. This wasn't just a temporary change. It was the beginning of something I had long avoided, a life I'd never imagined but was beginning to trust could be mine. a life where I wasn't bound by family obligations or old expectations, a life where I could choose what came next. And for the first time, I felt okay with that. The next few weeks passed by in a blur of quiet mornings, the smell of fresh flowers, and the gentle hum of a life that felt more like mine with each passing day. I took the job at the flower shop, and it was everything I hadn't realized I needed. There was something grounding in arranging flowers, in carefully placing petals, stems, and leaves in ways that made people smile. It wasn't complicated, but it was fulfilling in a way I hadn't felt in years. I met a handful of regulars, the kind of people who became familiar without needing to know everything about you. There was Max, an elderly man who came in once a week to buy a single rose for his wife, who'd passed away a few years ago. He always insisted on picking the most perfect rose, even though he could barely remember her favourite colour. There was Lily, a woman in her 30s who'd just moved from California. She started coming in every Saturday, always asking for advice on houseplants, telling me about her new life here. I liked hearing about her stories, how she was trying to find herself in a place that was still unfamiliar to her. But more than the people, it was the peace I found in my own space, away from the noise of family, away from the expectations. The constant pull to be something I wasn't. Here, I was just me. No more apologies, no more explanations. I could simply exist. One morning as I walked into work, I saw a familiar face standing outside the shop, leaning against a lamppost. It took me a second, but then I recognized him. Mark, my brother. He straightened up as I approached, an awkward smile on his face. I felt a jolt in my chest, a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't place. I had almost forgotten what it felt like to see him, really see him. "Hey, Mira," he said softly. "Can we talk?" I took a breath, not sure how to respond. A year ago I would have invited him in, listened to his apologies, accepted whatever excuse he had for not being there when I needed him, but not now, not anymore. "You can talk," I said, "but I don't need to listen." He looked taken aback, the smile faltering. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. The wedding. Not inviting you. Just everything. And I met his eyes, my hands at my sides, and for a long moment I didn't say anything. I felt that familiar weight of disappointment rise in me, but there was something else too, something light. The anger, the resentment was gone. The pain, dulled by time and distance, had faded. It was like I had already forgiven him long before he showed up, but forgiveness didn't mean I had to go back. It didn't mean I had to accept what wasn't offered in the first place. "I'm glad you're sorry, Mark, but it doesn't change anything," I said. "I don't need to be your safety net anymore. You've got to figure it out yourself." I did. There was a long pause before he spoke again, his voice small, almost uncertain. "I was hoping you could come back, to the family. We miss you." I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of finality. I don't think I belong there anymore, and I'm okay with that. I watched him take a step back, his shoulders slumping a little, and for the first time I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad, I was just done. I turned and walked inside the shop without looking back, and it felt like the last piece of the puzzle snapping into place. It wasn't about cutting ties or holding grudges, it was about choosing myself, choosing peace. And as I arranged a new bouquet that afternoon, the first in a series of many, I realized I wasn't just building a new life, I was finally living the one I had always deserved. The weeks that followed felt like a slow unraveling, but in the best possible way. I woke up each day to a world that was mine to shape, mine to experience. I walked through Seattle like I was learning it for the first time, letting the city's rhythm guide me rather than chasing some idea of what I should be. It wasn't perfect. There were days when the loneliness crept in, when I thought of my family and wondered if I'd made the right decision by walking away. But those moments passed quickly, replaced by something stronger, an unshakable peace that came with knowing I was finally living for myself. One evening after work, I took a walk down to the beach. The sun had just begun to set, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, and the air was warm, a gentle reminder that life didn't have to be hurried. I found a bench near the water and sat, watching the waves lap against the shore. The sound of the ocean, endless and soothing, filled the space between my thoughts. I took out the journal Clara had given me, the one I'd been writing in since the day I arrived. The pages were filled with my thoughts, my musings on life, and what it meant to finally put myself first. As I looked back at the entries, I realized how much had changed in such a short time. I had come here searching for something, and now I was finding it. Peace, purpose, and a sense of belonging that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. I wrote, I thought I was running away, but I wasn't. I was running towards something I've always needed, toward me. The words settled on the page like they belonged there, like they had always been a part of me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I closed the journal and took a deep breath, letting the salty air fill my lungs. The world around me was shifting, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I was embracing everything that was coming. I stood up, dusted off my jeans, and walked back toward the city. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking alone. I was walking with the version of myself I had always wanted to be. And that, I realized, was enough.